Welcome to Recovery with Root, a podcast centered on topics surrounding mental health and addiction. Through our Advanced Recovery Institute, a new entity of the Root Center for Advanced Recovery, we are committed to research and training to elevate clinical care. We hope you find this podcast informative, and most of all, we hope that it helps improve the lives of others. Remember, we're in this together, and recovery is possible. Welcome back to another episode of Recovery with Root. I'm Margot Farrell, Chief of Staff here at the Root Center for Advanced Recovery. I'm so excited because today we have one of my favorite people in the studio to talk to us, Ray Bishop, a senior counselor from our Henderson-Johnson clinic over in Hartford. Ray joins us this morning to tell us a little bit more about his journey to recovery, his journey working at Root, and really just what makes him the most wonderful person that we have here on our staff today. Welcome, Ray. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me here.
So, as we chatted a little bit before we got going here, this is going to be a discussion where we really delve deep into mental health, addiction, and how it pertains to your life and where you are today. When folks meet you at the Root Center, I mean, I've interviewed enough of your clients, I've interviewed enough of your colleagues to know that you are really a shining star here at the Root Center. And that's because of a lot of your efforts over the years. I mean, that just didn't happen overnight. So, I guess I'll let you start things off with where you think your story begins.
Well, thank you, Margot. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. It's an honor and privilege to be here. Wow, I guess my story kind of begins from childhood. Actually, I have to say that I had a wonderful childhood. I had two loving and caring parents. They were hard workers. Um, Dad was a career military guy, and Mom was a teacher. I had everything I needed, and a lot of the stuff that I wanted. And so, like, no problems there. I excelled in school. I did really well. Um, Decided I wanted to get into music, and so I majored in music in college, and had an opportunity to go on the road, and did that with a star who had a hit record, Gloria Gaynor, "I Will Survive," and that was quite an experience.
Wow.
So we traveled the world, did that. I hadn't finished my bachelor's degree when I went on the road, and when I left that group, I went back to school and got my bachelor's degree in applied music and education. Um, I was working in publishing and worked for the New York City Police Department for a time. I was a police dispatcher, a civilian dispatcher, and which was very interesting. Uh, and things were going very well, and began managing local bands from New York City, and that was going extremely well too. Um, and then I got caught out uh, with crack cocaine, and it was kind of weird that it happened when it did, because all through my musical career on the road, it was lots of drugs. The sex, drugs, rock and roll stuff is like real. And I avoided a lot of those pitfalls during that time. But later on, I got caught up. I got caught out, actually. And, I'd had success in different areas in education and schooling and things of that nature, work, um, being on the road. Those things I was very successful at it, and actually became a band leader for the group. Um, and this was the one thing that I met that I really couldn't beat by myself. I found myself looking in the mirror and not recognizing who I was. I remember the first time I was managing a group, and they were a real hot group in New York City. And I remember when the first time that I didn't show up for a gig, I uh, called the band leader at that time and told him, well, you take care of things, I'm busy. And my busy was getting high. Uh, I ended up really walking away from that group, walking away from a lot of investment in money, equipment, and that kind of things. And I had a contract with the band, and I walked away because I had told them when we made our contractual agreement that if at any time I was not going to be helpful to the group, I would walk away and let them go, because I own the name, but I allowed them to take it, and I gave up a whole sound system that I had invested in, and just kind of walked away because I thought I was going to be, and I knew I was going to be a drag on the group, and I never wanted to take from anyone, undeservedly. So, it was tough, but it was something that I needed to do. I found myself paying the guys late. I would get a deposit, and for services that the band was supposed to do, and then I would take that money and spend it, and then I would have to go and get that money back together and said, okay, guys, I can only give you half the money today. You're going to get paid next week. And I did that a few times, and I'm like, this is not going to work. And so I walked away from it. That took me on a road spiral. I had a job I was doing, a regular job, and the Saturday and Sunday weekends turned into Friday, Saturday, Sunday weekends, into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday weekends, and until I finally lost the job. And I had some wonderful employers, really wanted to help, and but I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. So I was on that kind of downward spiral for about 20 years, actually. And some loving and caring folk came into my life. My brother was one. My brother passed away a couple of years ago, but he passed away drug-free. He offered me to come and assist me and bring me into recovery. And he and my first sponsor, who actually worked for the Hartford Dispensary, which was the name prior to Root, his name was Bruce Maggot. And they came down to Brooklyn, New York, and picked me up and dropped me at a place in Middletown called Rushford. And I happen to work there now. But I was there, and that was October 11th, 2000. And so actually in about a month, I'll have 24 years drug-free.
Wow. So how old were you at that point?
I was...
When things kind of took off, how old were you?
I was about 22. Yeah, 22, 23.
Wow, 24 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. I might have those dates wrong, but
you know it's over 20 years. I
yeah.
mean, that's,
Well,
that's
I
the
know that
milestone.
I know when I went into treatment, and I know what today's date is.
There you go. And this will come out in October, so it'll be perfect for your celebration month.
That'll be perfect. Absolutely.
So 24 years next month. I mean, that is just, when you think about that and you're sitting here with me, and you're coming over from your morning shift at Henderson-Johnson, so you've met with some clients already this morning, and you're approaching that milestone. You're seeing some folks who are really at the start of their journey. How do you use your experiences and your approach when you meet with people?
I think that because of my experience, I'm able to be very empathetic. One of my superpowers is patience. And so I'm very patient with folk. I allow them to be who they are, and let them know that I'm here for them. And when they're ready and able to make a move, then we're here to discuss that and to make some viable plans that they have to be on board with. I know that there were a lot of people in my life that wanted me to change, that were trying to force me to be different, and nothing was going to change until I was ready to make the change myself. And I know that when I meet with folks, that they're suffering. They're suffering from a disease, and nobody asked to be burdened with a disease. But most folks don't know a way out, or they're not willing to take the options that are offered. So I try to offer options and let them know that, well, when you're ready, we're here. And in the meantime, how can we keep you alive? How can we keep this thing going and reduce your harm? How can we make your life as soft and healthy as possible, and how can we start to think about those things, about the different things. I mean, people need uh, proper housing, nutrition, uh, transportation, um, work, sustenance. Folks need these things, and um, basically, I think we're social beings, and the disease of addiction robs us of that. We don't want to see, we don't want to be seen. So I try to let folks know that I see you, and it's okay. We can see each other, and we can be there for each other. Um, I'm not your friend, but I'm your counselor who's here willing, who cares about where you want to go. And if you're ready, well, let's go. Let's do it.
How long would you say, how long were you in active addiction before that moment where you went with your brother and your former sponsor?
That was probably about 20 years out there. And it's a long time. Never expected to be where I was. I worked with politicians prior to active addiction. I was a legislative assistant at one point, working with the Black and Puerto Rican Legislative Caucus in New York. And I remember I raised my head up out of the sand long enough for there was an election day, and you can get a part-time job just working as a poll worker or something like that. And I remember getting up, making myself get up out of that stupor for that one election day, and going to the polls and doing what I had to do there. And there was a legislator who came through, who I had worked for. And matter of fact, I had even done meetings in his stead and represented him at different places in churches and things of that. And he looked at me and said, "Wow, Ray Bishop, you're supposed to be on top of the mountain." And I never forgot that I saw disappointment. I saw he was looking at a wasted soul. And I felt bad. Uh, I felt kind of useless, and I really couldn't figure a way out. Another point in time was my dad. Uh, as I said, he was a military guy. He was in the service for 21 years. Um, Rose to the rank of chief in the Navy in a time when blacks didn't have that opportunity, but my dad made it. I used to love going to the naval base and see folks salute my dad. Uh, well, after he retired from the service, he went and managed a store. And then he retired from that, and then he started his own business. He had a limousine service. And I remember he came to New York. They moved to South Carolina. As a matter of fact, when they were moving out of the house, they had a really nice house in Brooklyn, and I was living in a basement apartment, and I was but I was living there, telling them I'm going to pay rent, and basically never did. Um, and they moved to South Carolina, and I said, "Well, when are we going?" They said, "Well, we're moving because of you. You're not going with us." And I'm like, "Okay." So my dad came up to, this was about a year after that, he came up to New York to buy a new vehicle. And he came to where I was staying, and I was staying in a place that was basically a crack house. Um, and he just looked at me and shook his head. And I had never seen my dad really cry and be emotional until that moment when I asked him for money, and he said no. And it was the first time he had ever said no.
Wow.
And he said, "You don't have a license. You can't even help me drive this car." Um, no, and I had to tell him it's okay because I saw the look on his face. I said, "Dad, I understand. It's okay. It's all right." But the other side of that is that some years later, my parents came up from South Carolina to Middletown, Connecticut, and came to a family day at Rushford. And they saw me drug free, and they saw their son back again, and they had some hope and a lot of faith, and they were happy, you know. So that's the other side. I always say that we know that active addiction brings forth a lot of collateral damage, but active recovery brings collateral benefit.
Hmm.
And I see a lot of that. I have so much gratitude today. I try to give back as much as I possibly can because I know what the disease takes from an individual and from families and loved ones. This weekend, actually, my wife's birthday was this Monday. And so Sunday we had a cookout and we had family over and we had family come in from Cape Cod. And it was a glorious day, a glorious day. And I was on the grill, and after cooking and everything, and everybody, we had kids there, and they were doing their thing and playing basketball and whatnot. And I'm looking at um, my wife and I's backyard, and I'm looking at people having fun and eating uh, the food that I prepared on my grill, and I'm just looking around and I'm saying, "Wow, look at this." The folks in Brooklyn would never believe this. Um, and family would just come up and say how grateful they were. And one of my brothers-in-law said, "Well, this is the best time ever." And that meant a lot to me to be able to be there and show up, because there was a time where I couldn't show up for anything. I was just not available. When my grandmother died, I was in active addiction. I was the only one in the family that wasn't there. And I just think about what that did to my parents to have to try to explain why Ray wasn't there and everyone else was. And I'm sure that hurt them. And I know that stress is a killer. So I know that I shortened their lives by some time from all the stress that I put them through. And also, they were trying to figure out what they did wrong because of me. And we had to really have a conversation with my parents and tell them, no, it's not you at all. It's me. It was my decision and my choices that I made.
What do you think led you to that choice that first time?
That's hard to say. I think that I was just having fun, actually. You know, I wasn't like depressed or um, isolated. I was with a good friend of mine, and um, we were both working. We were both teaching at the time, and she was a dance instructor, and I was a music teacher in an after-school program. And we were getting high, and things were going okay because of the substance that we were using at the time. Um, and then I got introduced to um, cocaine that was cooked, and this was prior to crack. And off to the races. I'm like, whoa, what was that? Let's go. She rode a motorcycle, and I never wanted to get on a motorcycle. That day I did.
So all inhibitions went out the window there.
Yeah, all of that stuff went out the window. Jumped on the motorcycle with her. I'm like, whoop, let's go get some more of that. And it was like off to the races after that. And the initial stuff is like euphoric, a lot of fun. I had a lot of great times at the beginning. I mean, if you're not going to have a positive payoff, then why do it? And that was the attraction. Um,
Then after a while, you find yourself chasing that
Ch-
initial moment.
Chasing that and trying to, and I'm trying to figure out, like, I had a regular job and trying to figure out, well, how to pay for this and pay for everything else that goes along with living.
I think it's interesting to showcase, what you're saying here is that sometimes, not only does addiction kind of live in the shadows, so we don't hear about it all the time. We don't hear about mental health struggles. And then when we do, we associate it with sometimes and a lot of times a major traumatic moment. Maybe it was a traumatic upbringing or something really horrible that happened to someone. And then you kind of think, oh, I get it. I get how that happened. But you're sitting here telling me you had great family life, great job, you had hobbies that you enjoyed, and yet it was just something you were curious about.
Exactly. And I didn't I didn't have that traumatic event. I didn't have the um, mental health issues. Um, Socializing, I had great friends, great friends. When I had no place to stay, I stayed with one of my good friends, and when he had a nice Steinway piano, and I remember he looked at me and said, "What is that?" I had some drugs, and he said, "I'm going to put this on the mantelpiece, and I'm going to see how long it can stay there without you using it." And I said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." Lasted about maybe an hour.
An hour.
um, and he just shook his head. He shook his head.
I'm sure one of the many who wanted you to stop at that time when you just were not ready.
Was not ready. Um, and the day that I decided, the ball rolling of getting into some type of treatment, getting some type of help, one of my good friends had moved out of town, hadn't seen me in a while. We talked on the phone here and there, but he was one of my best friends. And I'm fortunate to have a few best friends. uh, he came into Brooklyn, came into town, and he saw where I was living, same place my dad saw, and he just shook his head. I was, I guess, like a ghost figure of myself, of what he remembered as me. And he called my first cousin and said, "When's the last time you saw your cousin Ray?" And she's like, "Oh, it's been a while, but we talk." And he said, "You haven't seen him?" And she's like, "No, I figured that, he's on the road or he's doing some whatever." He says, "Well, he's a crackhead." And she was like, "What?" So my cousin Sandra called my brother and sister, and um, it's just, I only have two siblings. I have a brother and a sister. And said, "You have to do something. Ray needs help." My brother's like, "Well, I've tried, and he hasn't been ready." She said, "Well, you got to try again. You got to try again." So they got me on a conference call, my brother and sister. And my sister is, she's an educator too. And she's kind of like the intellectual, and my brother's kind of the street guy. So I talk to them usually separately, and I talk to my sister on her level, and I talk to my brother on his level, and just talk my way around it. But this time they kind of hit me together, and that approach kind of hit me. And they said, "Well, what are you going to do? Your cousin is totally upset." And I said, "Well, I'll talk to her. I'll make it right." They said, "Oh, you're going to lie to her?" And that kind of got me because they knew that I really don't like to lie. Um, and I said, "Well," my brother said, "Well, why don't you get some help? Why don't you accept some help? I'll come down and get you." He lived in Connecticut at the time. And I said, "Okay, sure." He says, "Okay, I'm on my way." I said, "No, no, you can't come now. This was a Friday night.
Mm.
I had drugs on the table. No, you can't come now." So we negotiated. He ended up coming on Sunday that weekend, um, with one of his friends, because they tell us in the program, that's called a 12 step, when you go out to help someone and meet someone. If you go in a 12 step with somebody, don't do it alone, because they can get you high before you can get them sober.
Mm.
So he came with his best friend, who ended up becoming my sponsor. So Norman and Bruce came and picked me up. And I thought I was going to my brother's house, but we ended up at the treatment facility. Um, and along the way, I just had so much help and assistance and love from folks that I met
Were
along
you
the way.
ready at that point, you think?
Um, I don't think I really thought I was ready, because I told the person I was staying with, "I'll be back." I'll be back. And I never went back, but I thought I would be back.
Mm.
And I didn't think that I would stay. I was thinking of ways I would, um, what I would do when I left out of there. But after a while, after being drug free for a while and being in treatment and going from the detox to the um, intensive treatment program and then to a halfway house, um, over some months, you know, my clarity came back and was like, wait a minute, I can't go back there. The area that I was surviving in Brooklyn was called the belly of the beast.
Mm.
That's what we called it. Bedford Stuyvesant. It's different now, but at that time, it was devastating. It was the drugs were everywhere. It was totally infested.
I think that's an interesting component too, because sometimes you hear, and it's true, and that's what I hear from everybody who's told me their story is that, they had to be ready, and yeah, you do have to be ready. But what I'm hearing from you also is that you were kind of ready, but also the readiness came along the way. So it's, I think, comforting in one way to hear that you don't have to be 100% ready to give it a try, to try recovery, because it got easier for you the longer you were there, but you never had the intention to stay from the get-go.
Absolutely. Um, and I was very fortunate to have folks. My brother was very much involved and invested in the 12-step program, Narcotics Anonymous. So he showed me exactly what to do and hooked me up with his network and had me and told me that I needed to build my own network. So they told me what to do. They said, get to meetings, right? And I was at the facility at the time. The facility I was in took us to meetings, so I was able to get that experience and meet people. And they were like, "Oh, you're Norman's brother. Hi, welcome," and they would give me a hug. And and then when I had an opportunity out of treatment, they said, "Well, stay for the business meeting," and then I would get voluntold for a commitment. Well, you're going to be the door greeter. The commitment is for 30 days, and so I had to be at the meeting every week throughout for that month, and I would hug folks at the door and meet people. And they told me to get phone numbers and not just have the paper passed around the room, but to go up to people and get numbers directly from them, so I would know who, kind of connect the face with the number, and then use the numbers and call folks. And then they told me to look around the room and see who's um, got what you're looking for in terms of recovery. All right? See who's spiritual, who has a message that resonates with you, that you find positive and optimistic. And look for a sponsor. And don't just raise your hand and say, I need a sponsor, because you wouldn't look for a mate that way. But watch people. Not only listen to how they talk, but watch how they walk also. How do they act at the break? How do they act at the end of the meeting? Uh, do they try to? Uh, are they predators trying to hit on newcomers just coming in? Um, do they have a message, but do they act the way they talk? So by following these things, and I was able to get a sponsor and work some steps and progress. And I got a job in Connecticut, and my first job I think was at a church. My brother had a business and a nonprofit that was in the basement of a church, and he hooked me up with the minister there. And before I knew it, I was the sexton custodian at this church, and the church had a lot of nice instruments, and so I would clean up and do my duties and things like that at the church, and then I'd have an opportunity to tinker on some of the instruments. And from there, I got a job playing at another church because they were like, "Oh, you play music?" I said, "Well, yeah, I haven't played in a long time." But they said, "Well, do you read music?" I said, "Yes, I do." And I got a job at a church, and I'm still at that church now, so um, I'm not in the clubs, and I'm not on the grand stage, but I'm very happy.
And you also have, so not only are you successfully just living this life in recovery, but you've done some things as you've accumulated those years. You've accumulated degrees, different positions. You're talking about different, organizations and churches that you're with and music groups. And speak a little bit about that journey, because I think sometimes, it's one thing to maybe get on the journey to recovery and figure out what that next step in life looks like. What's your next chapter look like? And you really grabbed the bull by the horns and made this your life's mission. I mean, I love going into your office because there's just all your degrees everywhere. And when you have a patient who sits in the office and you can show them, well, this could be life after, life after active addiction.
Well, education always was big in my family. They always pushed us to move forward, and I like learning. Think education is a powerful thing. Knowledge is a great thing, I think, to get. And so when I got the job at the Hartford Dispensary, which is now the Root Center for Advanced Recovery, it gave me an opportunity to go back to school. And I didn't even have to leave the building. I was able to uh, study and get my drug and alcohol certification uh, right there in the building. I was able to go back to school and get my master's degree. Um, and then that was good, so I got a second master's degree, and just able to move forward. It's I think it's important not only to have experience, but also to have that evidence-based background. Um, it's important, I think, for folks to know that uh, I'm not just something I learned off the street, but also I've got the clinical knowledge and expertise um, to be the consummate professional. And, don't know everything and never will know everything, but I know enough to be there for someone, to know that it's important that they feel that, okay, I'm in the right place. I know that when I go into my doctor's office, I like to know that they did some work to get there, and also has a good balance in what they're bringing to the table. So that's what I strive to do. I strive to have a good balance with the education, with the experience, with the willingness to learn, and with the compassion and empathy that I think goes a long way in making that connection. Because I'm not going to come up with any uh, super solution for someone all the time, if ever. But I certainly can let them know that, look, I'm here for you, and we can figure this out. And if you're willing to do some work, I'm willing to work right along with you.
And I've heard you say so many times that it doesn't feel like work to you, what you do. This is so much more to you.
Absolutely. Well, I work quite a bit.
You do. You do.
I have a full-time job with Root Center, and I have a part-time job on the weekends, and also at a facility, at the facility that I was treated at Rushford. I'm there on the weekends. And no, I really couldn't or wouldn't do what I'm doing if it wasn't a passion for me. So because it's a passion, it doesn't really feel like work. It just feels like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I tell folks all the time, well, if you think this is work, try active addiction.
Yeah. Because it sounds like from what you were saying before, you were doing a lot of work to keep that habit afloat, whether it was the lies to people or the finagling, the figuring out the money, when are you going to do it, where are you going to do it, all those, it's a lot to keep up with.
It's hard work. It's hard work to stay high and to get high and to figure out how you're going to get the next one, particularly if there's two people in the household. There were two of us. And so we're trying to figure out how to keep us both high and to get the next one. And unfortunately, there were some children there as well. Um, so the woman I was staying with had children and grandkids that were there. And it makes me think of the disservice that we did to those kids that were there in that environment. Um, Thank goodness they all turned out very well. But I was the guy that would do the homework with them, and uh, there'd be drugs in our room, and homework had to be done, and I'm like, okay, you got to stop, you got to go help them. Or if the school called for something, and they weren't blood relations to me, but I was there, so I made myself get up and go get to the school and talk to the teachers and do what I had to do. So despite the disease, there was still some spark that was still in me that knew that I had to be there for these kids.
You knew there was maybe more in the future that you wanted for yourself.
That's true.
Because you still had that desire. You still had that. Sometimes we hear, folks make these decisions, and when they're not in active addiction anymore, they're like, I can't believe I did that. You're telling me this moment of clarity where you're knowing, like, this is not right. Like, I got to do better. I got to do more.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tried to keep my mind going, even when I was on drugs. I tried to keep my mind active and do puzzles and Scrabble and things like that, and because I knew that the way I was going, I would lose it if I didn't stay active. I did taxes for drug dealers and the bodegas and things like that around in the neighborhood, and wrote letters for folks and things like that. Uh, I was the guy that they came to for things like that, and
now here you are 24 years later.
24 years later,
and you're the guy that people come to when they want help. Right? Because
yes.
how many of your patients have I interviewed at this point? And every single one of them, I'm like, oh, I'm so thankful I got put with Ray. And one thing I always ask patients when I'm interviewing them and asking them questions about their stories, I say, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to share? That if somebody came across this video, what would you want them to know? So I'll ask you that as our final question. What would you want others to know? Is there anything I didn't say that you think is important to share when it comes to your story?
I think that my story is one of many. That there's a lot of folks out here who are recovering and have recovered from the disease of addiction. That anything is possible. That it's a glorious, glorious life post active addiction. Where I came from, I had no idea, no thought that I'd possibly go back to school, meet the woman in my life, right, who helped me on this journey, and that we can do this together, and that life is worth living, and it's worth never giving up, ever.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. Ray, thank you so much for sharing your story. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And we are so appreciative for everything you do. Not only do you help us all here as your colleagues, but we know you've helped so many patients.
Thank you, Margot.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of our podcast, Recovery with Root. As always, stay connected with us on social media to learn about when next podcast episodes will drop. You can comment, ask questions, even let us know about future topics that you'd like to see discussed. Until next time, remember, progress is the destination.